Meet Michael Williams, a 51-year-old Army captain who had just returned home after a stint of service. As he stepped into the familiar house, a very bad surprise greeted him in the kitchen. His daughter seemed to have slept on the floor. Perplexed, he asked about the circumstances that led to this unusual scene. It turned out that his wife, the girl's stepmother, had compelled her into this situation. After learning what happened, Michael resolved to address the situation by responding the same way. Captain Michael Williams was finally on his way home, and the anticipation was big. Having been away from the country for over 8 months, he found it difficult to stay connected with his family during his absence. His service record included 4 deployments to Afghanistan before the US troops' permanent withdrawal from the region. Michael had earned commendations and the respect of his fellow service members. He often spoke about how his comrades in Afghanistan had become like a second family to him. However, as he turned 50, he missed a lot his actual family. His commitment to duty remained strong, yet the separation from his wife Annie, his daughter Amelia, and his stepchildren Melissa and Charles weighed heavily on him. When he married Annie, his daughter Amelia was just 3 years old, while Annie already had 2 grown children of her own. His latest tour in Afghanistan was marked by unreliable phone and internet connections. He had to content himself with brief, sporadic video calls. During one such call, Michael said that he would be away until the troops departed from Afghanistan. However, he got lucky and he found himself released 2 months ahead of schedule and allowed to go home. The journey back to his house in Florida was surreal. The thought of reuniting with his family made the miles fly by. He didn't say anything and wanted to surprise them. Upon reaching his home, Michael didn't bother with the luggage. The early hours of the day found him standing at the front door, eyes glistening with tears and a big smile from ear to ear. He called out for his loved ones with excitement and emotion. "It's me, your husband and father, back at last," he announced as he looked for the keys. A big silence greeted him. The absence of sounds from within the house left him perplexed. Where could they be, he wondered. Then he decided to wait inside for their return. They would be stunned to find him sitting on the sofa, sipping a cold beer and watching TV. He unlocked the front door, his heart racing in anticipation. He called out once more, his voice echoing through the stillness. Yet the void remained unbroken. A faint response reached his ears after a short pause. "Dad, I'm here." The voice was his daughter Amelia's, but it was hardly more than a whisper. It was strange. Amelia was known for her vivacious spirit. It was not common for her to speak so quietly. "Amelia, where are you?" he called back, worry marking his words. With each step he took down the hallway, he checked every room, finding them all empty. The walk led him to the kitchen, where a closed door blocked his path. Using his strength, he pushed the door open, determined to find out the source of the voice and its mystery. In the cozy kitchen, Amelia's tear-streaked face came into view as she rushed towards her father, embracing him in a tight hug. Her sobs were a mix of relief and overwhelming emotion. "I missed you so much," she said out between sobs. Donald had no idea what was going on. Although he had experienced multiple deployments abroad, some of them very long, he had never returned to find his daughter in such a vulnerable state, not even during her younger years. Holding Amelia close, he noticed an out-of-place mattress on the kitchen floor. "Amelia, are you sleeping here?" he asked, with a mix of concern and confusion. Struggling to collect her thoughts, Amelia attempted to reply, but the words caught in her throat, giving way to more tears and gasps. Michael held her reassuringly, urging her to regain composure. "It's all right, sweetheart. Take your time," he comforted, his heart aching for his distressed daughter. Michael's initial anticipation of a heartwarming homecoming had taken a sharp turn into confusion and worry. Drawing on the authoritative tone he had learned during his military service, he calmly requested that Amelia compose herself and provide a clear account of the situation. "I need you to explain why you were locked in here and why there's a mattress in the kitchen," he asked. After another round of sobs, Amelia found the strength to steady her voice. With a deep breath, she began to articulate her distress. "Don't you see, Dad? You always leave and I'm left behind with them, all alone." Her words held a mixture of anguish and desperation, though Michael was still struggling to see the full picture. Holding her tightly once more, he reassured her that his deployment had ended and that he had returned earlier than expected, promising not to leave her side again. As the atmosphere grew more calm, he gently urged Amelia to share her story. 6 months prior, Amelia began recounting the events that had unfolded. It was around that time that her stepsister Melissa started to complain about sharing a room with her. When Michael married Annie, she and her 2 children joined him in his home. While Charles had his own room, Melissa was set to share with the younger Amelia. Back then, Melissa was still quite young and had been enthusiastic about having a little sister. She had happily embraced the idea of room sharing, claiming she'd watch over Amelia and be a close friend in her growing years. Throughout their childhood, the 2 stepsisters got along harmoniously with typical usual minor conflicts. However, as they entered their teenage years, Melissa's need for personal space began to surface, clashing with the shared room situation. A turning point came when Melissa found refuge in the bathroom, using it as a means to avoid sharing space with Amelia. However, her real desire was for Amelia to leave the room. Over time, Melissa's resentment towards Amelia deepened more and more. During Michael's initial 2 overseas deployments, his daughter and stepdaughter were younger, and their disputes over the bedroom weren't as serious. Yet during his 3rd absence as they matured, tensions escalated. On a day when nobody else was at home, Melissa chose to spend time in her room with her boyfriend. Amelia arrived unannounced, catching the couple off guard and causing them embarrassment. It was a situation neither had anticipated, and Amelia felt awkward and surprised to find her stepsister with her boyfriend. "Ah, sorry, Melissa," Amelia said, blushing. "I didn't know anyone was here. You didn't mention it." This triggered an intense reaction from Melissa. She approached Amelia in a fit of anger, yelled at her for not knocking, and accused her of ruining the moment. In response, Amelia explained that she hadn't expected anyone to be in the house and reminded Melissa that the room was also hers. Melissa's anger intensified, and she shouted, "Living with you is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I wish you were gone from here." In tears, Amelia ran downstairs, seeking refuge on the sofa where she buried her face in the cushions. Melissa's hurtful words had cut deep, far more than their past disagreements ever had. Although they had their share of arguments and differences, they had never spoken to each other in such a hurtful way. Moments later, Annie returned home and discovered Amelia's tearful state. Amelia refrained from mentioning the incident with Melissa and her boyfriend, only stating that they had a fight and that Melissa wanted her out of her life. Amelia hoped her stepmother would intervene, but Annie's response was unexpectedly disappointing. "Sometimes I wish you would disappear too, just like your father," Annie said, offering no further explanation before leaving the room. The days that followed brought a mix of confusion and relief to Amelia. She felt better with the passage of time, attempting to reconcile the feeling of being displaced. However, the bond between the stepsisters went for a significant change. When Michael was home, their interactions retained an air of civility, but when he was away, Melissa's behavior turned cold, often ignoring Amelia. Amelia had never shared this with her father, convinced that his responsibilities as an army captain were already enough. He had his military family under his command, as he frequently reminded her, and he also had his family of the heart. Amelia believed that the problems with Melissa could be resolved without involving her father, but as time would reveal, she was mistaken. As Amelia continued sharing her ordeal, Michael listened with a mixture of revulsion and regret. When he had married Annie and became a stepfather to Melissa and Charles, he had always treated them as if they were his own children. The news of the escalating conflict between the stepsisters was deeply unsettling to him. He understood that disagreements could arise between them, but he had never imagined that it would take such a dire extent. His confusion deepened as he wondered why his wife hadn't taken any action to address the situation in his absence. He felt guilty for not having recognized the extent of the problems within his own home. Turning his attention to the present, Michael finally inquired about the whereabouts of Annie and the others. Amelia informed him that they had departed 4 days earlier to celebrate Melissa's birthday at the beach, where they were scheduled to reunite with Charles. Yet this was a private affair for their family, inclusive of Annie's ex-husband, Melissa's father. Consequently, Amelia had been left behind, confined to the kitchen. "Annie locked me in here. She'd have some snacks and whatever was in the fridge. She told me she was doing it to prevent me from messing with Melissa's belongings or trying to reclaim my room. I called out, but no one came. The phone rang in the living room, but I couldn't get out to answer it." Amelia concluded, her eyes welling up with fresh tears as she relived the experience. Michael's heart suffered as he absorbed the extent of his daughter's story. He was astonished by the cruelty of the stepdaughter and the lack of intervention from his wife. The anxiety and isolation Amelia had endured were palpable in her words, and Michael's resolve to address the situation only grew stronger. He could no longer allow this event to persist unchecked, and he was determined to find a solution that would bring his family back together. 2 days later, Annie, Melissa, and Charles returned home, only to be met with a scene of chaos. The garage was inaccessible due to the 3 mattresses sprawled across the front yard, including the couple's own. The entrance was littered with various belongings and clothing items belonging to Annie and her children. The sight was shocking. Charles and Melissa looked stunned, and Annie's anger was palpable, convinced that her stepdaughter Amelia was behind this apparent act of defiance. Fuming with rage, Annie unleashed her fury, blaming Amelia for this and warning of the consequences. However, upon entering the house, instead of finding Amelia, she was met by her husband, Michael Williams, sitting calmly on the sofa with the TV on and a beer in his hand. His tone was controlled but serious as he greeted Annie, expressing his awareness of the events that had unfolded during his absence. He confronted her about the surprise she had orchestrated, emphasizing his disappointment in her, Melissa, and Charles, whom he had considered his family. Annie's attempt to explain herself, and Michael cut her off, saying that he was already well informed about the situation. Michael's revelations left Annie flustered and speechless. He revealed that he had returned early from his mission, choosing to surprise his family only to be met by an unexpected situation. He addressed his disappointment with his wife and stepchildren. Annie pleaded for a conversation to calm the situation, expressing concern about their future if he were to leave them in this state. In response, Michael informed her that Amelia had returned to her room, a decision he had made. However, he clarified that he had no intention of evicting anyone from the house, as he believed in fairness and compassion. He recounted Amelia's days of sleeping in the kitchen and suggested that Annie, Melissa, and Charles could sleep in the garage. The 2 teenagers vehemently rejected the idea, protesting loudly. Annie, fearing for her family, accused Michael of intending to throw them out of the house. She defended her children passionately, while Michael remained resolute in his decision. He declared that he wouldn't grant a second chance to those who had betrayed his trust by mistreating his daughter. He firmly asserted that he still was the legal owner of the house and reminded them of their betrayal. Michael warned that if they were unwilling to spend time in the garage, then they should leave. The emotional tension escalated as Melissa began to cry on Charles' shoulder, and Annie realized that this marked the end of their stay. Defiant and unwilling to follow her husband's wishes, she threatened to take legal action to extract money from him. Michael remained composed, stating that she would not take anything else from him. Unfazed by Annie's outburst, Michael revealed that he had already contacted the police and his lawyer, informing them of the abuse and imprisonment that his daughter had endured. He revealed that they had a witness to support their claims. He pointed out that Annie's actions were inexcusable and against the law. Then he left and went up the stairs and stayed in the room with Caroline, from where they could watch Margaret, Alyssa, and Henry picking up their clothes and belongings, putting them in the car, and leaving. In the weeks that followed, Michael shifted his focus entirely to Amelia's well-being. Kathy, a new neighbor, emerged as a constant presence, visiting Amelia nearly every day after she knew what had happened to her. She was resolute in her mission to protect Amelia from the trauma caused by those distressing events. Their bond grew stronger, and Kathy's companionship provided a much-needed anchor for Amelia during her healing process. News arrived that Michael's report had had consequences. In order to avoid legal consequences, Annie struck a deal with the prosecutor. She was required to pay a fine, adhere to regular oversight by a social worker, and commit to a substantial amount of community service. Michael, resolute in his decision to move forward, initiated divorce proceedings, a step that marked the official end of a chapter marked by the betrayal of his wife. With military commitments no longer taking him away from home, Michael fully embraced his role as Amelia's father and protector. Yet, it wasn't just Michael who extended his support. Kathy continued to be a supporting presence. Her visits evolved from occasional check-ins to more meaningful interactions, often accompanied by homemade treats or meals. What started as a gesture of kindness for Amelia soon encompassed all 3 of them. As time went on, Kathy's warmth and companionship extended beyond food, forging a very strong connection. Michael and Kathy found themselves growing closer as they faced the challenges of helping Amelia, who, once burdened by her trauma, started to exhibit signs of recovery. Her cheerful spirit returned, and the scars of her past began to fade. Amid the shared meals and conversations, a new sense of belonging emerged. Amelia was the first to notice the transformation. The 3 of them had formed an unconventional yet profoundly meaningful bond. Through shared experiences, heartfelt conversations, and the simple joy of being together, they found solace in each other's company. This evolving relationship hinted at the prospect of a new family being forged, one built not just on shared bloodlines, but on a foundation of understanding, compassion, and mutual support. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and this other story that may be appearing on the screen will most likely move you as well. Have a nice day and see you in the next video.